Welcome to the Awaken Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters. Get ready to create magic and miracles as you lean into your heart's desires. I believe not only does the heart want what it wants, but it knows. This show is a weekly deep dive into what it means to live from an awakened heart. I'll be sharing inspiring stories and real conversations with people just like you, who have turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. My mission is to show you how you too can be connected and heart-centered in every area of your life. Your journey to aligning with more love, more joy, and your wildest dreams come true starts now. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Awaken Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters. Today's conversation is a lot of fun for me. You're going to find this very not only informative, but maybe you'll see something in yourself reflected in this episode. So Ray and I, Ray Doustdar, who is our guest today, have known each other for a long time. Both of us didn't grow up in LA. I didn't grow up in LA, but we lived in LA around the same time and experienced a lot of the same things in LA. Man, it was a heyday when we lived there, the club scene. You'd always see celebrities going to like Laker games, basketball games, fight nights. It was a lot of fun. But Ray and I had a lot of similarities that happened. When I lived in LA, I was completely oblivious to the goings-ons in the world. What's going on? Okay, I don't need to know more. I didn't want to dive into anything that was happening in the world because I just didn't need to know. Politics, forget about it. I thought all politicians were liars. I didn't understand anything. And I was probably more the better for not really understanding anything like I do now. Now it's like upside down world for me every single day. So Ray and I, over the last couple years of what happened to our country, to us, to the world, was the quote unquote pandemic. I said pandemic that was unleashed upon us. We both saw that a lot of things just didn't make sense as time went on. It's like, what in the world is going on here? So both of us took dives into what was happening in the world. I was alone in Portland. He was still in California. I believe he was in Laguna Beach or Laguna, wherever it was that he lived at the time. So we both kind of examined what was going on in the world. And our eyes both opened. And Ray is an entrepreneur himself. He is the founder of BUICED Liquid Vitamins. And it really revolutionized the way people think of and consume vitamins. So he's very successful at that. I mean, how many times have you tried to choke down these horse-sized pills that upset your stomach every time you consume them? So these liquid solution, it prioritizes bioavailability and convenience. Ray has a passion for health and dedication to providing a superior product, which has positioned BUICED as a leader in the dietary supplement market. And besides that, Ray has a very successful, within the last year, podcast. Like he had come to me back in the fall and said, I want to start a podcast. What do you think about that? I gave him all the tips and tricks and how much I love doing it. And he literally has taken this podcast to the stratosphere. He's got over 50,000 followers on his Instagram page, Deep Shallow Dive podcast. And he interviews various thought leaders, innovators, and influencers. When he offers a unique blend of deep insights and lighthearted conversation. And Ray has such a natural charisma and inquisitive nature. His motto is calling a spade a spade. He's an engaging host, and it's definitely a favorite among those who appreciate thoughtful discourse, genuine storytelling, and calling, like I said, a spade a spade. That's his little motto. And it's become synonymous with Deep Shallow Dive. Now, Ray, being the entrepreneur he is and the innovator, he just published a book. He released Deep Shallow Dive into You, and this book fosters personal growth and self-awareness. It offers readers a transformative journey to cultivate a more authentic relationship with themselves. Ray aims to connect with readers profoundly through his writing, sharing insights and strategies to help them live with unwavering authenticity and intention. And a lot of the pillars very much relate to what we talk about here on the Awaken Heart podcast. There's like deep, shallow, and dive, and he will dive into which each one means and I'm taking a lot of this to my own heart because a lot of my diving into the goings on in the world went very, very deep down into the rabbit hole that even Alice couldn't find her way out of, but I found my way out of it. So it's a matter of pulling out to a certain perspective when you're taking it all in. So this is a really fun conversation for me. I really love having people like known for a long time, like Ray, on this podcast to see where they began, where I knew them maybe 20 years ago, and to where they are now, and all the pieces in between that fell into place to bring whatever gifts they have to the world, whether that be authoring a book, creating a coaching program, becoming a public speaker, helping to empower others to do the same, bringing their gifts out into the world. So it's an honor to have my longtime friend, Ray Doustdar, on the Awaken Heart podcast. So without further ado, here is today's conversation with Deep Shallow Dives, Ray Doustdar. Hi, Ray. Welcome to the Awaken Heart podcast.
Hey, Nancy. Thanks for having me. I totally appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this.
I'm so excited to have you on. My old friend from LA. We've known each other for many, many years. I believe the first time we met was through our friend Doria, right?
That's
Doria.
right.
And you
That's
used
right.
to do the fight nights.
I did. I used to do the fight nights, and oh my God, that feels like a
It was a
lifetime
while
ago.
ago.
Not only feels like a lifetime ago in terms of the world was normal back then.
Oh my God. The world was normal. Like, what is normal? Like, oblivious. I was so oblivious. Like, you and I have a lot of similar stories as far as we grew up in LA, and good thing we were a little oblivious living in LA at the time, because you had mentioned here that you had a huge wake up call. Back in March of 2020, we both had the same thing happen to us where our eyes went wide open. And I think it changed our whole perspective of the way we view the world and how we, our relationships, our friends, how we view information and all that. It was such a huge thing. And the world is so much different now. And you really dive into how we can conceptualize or look at all this information that we're getting. And we'll dive into that a little more as we get into the show more. But you've had such a great background. I mean, first of all, you did fight nights, and you're your own entrepreneur where it's Boost. Is that how you call it? Boost?
Yeah, Boost.
Liquid Vitamins.
Liquid Vitamins, that was 2013. And that process was, I just personally hated taking pill form vitamins. They would get stuck in my throat. And then more importantly, I'd get nauseous from the process. So I would take my vitamins and then be stuck with a good 20 minutes of nausea, whether I took them with food, without food. I would try to be like, okay, let me just go to sleep and I'll take them at night. But I would still get that nausea. And so one random day, I was like, you know what? And at the time, I was really into fresh vegetable juicing, which is actually so funny. If you remember back in 2012, 2013, that was like the trend.
The
Everyone
rage.
Juicing, I'm into juicing. And that is definitely no longer the
I
trend,
know.
although I still do it, but it's definitely not the trend. Anyway, one random day, I was like, I hate this feeling of nausea. I wonder what would happen if I crushed my vitamins on my counter and I drank it with my juice. And so I did that. I crushed my little Costco pill pack on my counter. I poured it into my juice, and basically it kind of changed the taste of the juice, which I wasn't crazy about. But the best part was I did not experience that 20 minutes of nausea. So I did that process for a week, and honestly, I felt really good. Like I was like, wow, this is, most importantly, I'm not getting nauseous. So that's amazing. And then I realized, I started doing some research. I started digging in, which is actually funny. It's all the similar skill sets that I then applied when we'll talk about the deep shallow dive process and all that. But I really started to understand, why am I getting nauseous from pill form vitamins? And it's not because of the vitamins. It's because of all the fillers and binders, and they call them excipients, that are needed to turn that into a pill, or turn that into the shape of Fred Flintstone, or whatever the case may be. When your body pulls that apart through the digestive process, those fillers, binders, and excipients, they have no nutritional value, and that's what causes the nausea for it. So long story short on that, I went down a rabbit hole of, okay, could I maybe create a liquid version of my daily multivitamin that doesn't have all those fillers and binders, because I don't need to create it into a pill because you're going to be drinking it. And so fundamentally, you're going to end up getting all the benefits of the vitamins without all of the other junk. And yeah, that's what I did. So that's Boost Liquid Vitamins. I can't even believe it's been a decade, but good news is the business is still making it happen, even though
Oh,
there were a
that's
lot of
great.
trials and tribulations because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And, ironically, the trials and tribulations with, the manufacturing process and, at the time, which is crazy that COVID was 4 years ago. It's been 4 years since that
Oh,
Friday.
what a nightmare,
Remember,
man.
it was Friday, March 13th,
Mm.
2020, when I don't even know if it was Trump who said it or if it was Fauci who said it or whatever, but they basically came out and said, "Hey, if you can, stay home for the weekend and, don't leave your house," and all that. And I remember, like, literally that Friday night, I was like, "What? What are they talking about?" It wasn't like, I always make this joke. It wasn't like I'd look out my window and there's like an apocalypse and there's like zombies out there and people are just falling dead. I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean don't leave the house? So it didn't really make sense to me. And I think a lot of people, especially now with hindsight, they look back and they're like, okay, yeah, that doesn't make sense. But everything was happening so fast. I think society in general just got caught up in fear. I mean, it really got caught
Mm-hmm.
up in fear. And so when you get caught up in fear, it's a very powerful trait. I think you end up looking for somebody to tell you what to do. And honestly, I think that's where things have gone since March of 2020. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is, I think 4 years later, we can have rational discussions about this now with other people. I think during that first 4 years, especially 2020, probably all of 2021, and I'd say most of 2022,
22.
it was very bipolar. Like, you were on
Mm-hmm.
this side or you were on
Yeah.
that side.
And it's not
And
about that. It's not
no,
about
no,
one political thing or another. Oh, you're a right wing conspiracy QAnon.
it's definitely not. And I have this discussion all the time with people, and I'm like, listen, whatever your political party is or your views are, I totally respect that. But let's like rise to 30,000 feet. And
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally, you have to call a spade with even the folks you support, because they're not going to do everything right. Nobody does everything right. I don't do everything right. You don't do everything right. We all have takes on things that not everyone might agree with. And so it's no different with the political system. There might be a certain set of things you agree with, but you have to call a spade on everybody at all times. And when you do that, I really feel like there can bring some honesty, to the political process that we're living in. And all of that feeds into our lives, all of that feeds into whether it's an awakening, an epiphany, or whether you just want to maybe understand what's really going on in the world besides what you're seeing on your daily news or besides what you're seeing in your social media. And this is where, this concept of deep shallow dive, really was born, because as 2020, as we got into April, May, June, July, you know, it wasn't honestly, it wasn't about questioning what was going on. It was about trying to understand it, because think about it. This was the first time in our lifetimes as, Gen Xers, that
The
you
first
really
time.
felt like the government, and again, it's not even the government. You really felt like there was limitations on your freedom. And
Very much.
other countries, I've got friends in multiple countries. For them, it wasn't is difficult to adjust because most other countries,
Right.
they don't have the total carte blanche freedom that
Like
we've
us.
been privileged to have in the United States. So when that carte blanche freedom starts to get like impeded, I think certain people were like, okay, wait a minute, help me understand what's going on. And I was one of those people. It wasn't about being radical or being anything besides inquisitive. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, does it make sense that when I go to a restaurant, when I stand up, I have to put the mask on? When I sit
See, you
down,
had a critical thinking. Like you thought some people just followed along, like did whatever they said. We never had these kind of things happen to us in our whole life, like their freedoms
right,
taken away. And
that's
I push against like people telling me what to do. So we had like we used our own discernment, like, "Ah, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't feel right." And so we did our own deep, shallow dives. Well, I did a deep, it wasn't shallow. I got consumed for
deep
2 years. I deep dived. I was in the rabbit hole. I'm like, God, help me.
yeah.
And I'm still learning.
Everybody has to go through that process,
Mhm.
first of all, on their own timing. And then second of all, through their own methodology, And so for me, what really 2020, 2021, and 2022 was, and again, the cool thing is I finally captured all this in the book, which I know we'll talk about in a second. But what it was for me was just kind of waking up to the world and trying to just understand things in a way that wasn't overwhelming. And so I remember as I would like tackle certain issues, I would be like, okay, let's try and understand what's going on with X, Y, and Z. And you could either go deep, deep and honestly drive yourself crazy, and then also not be able to necessarily communicate that in a way to even get people to listen.
Mhm.
And I realized, like, okay, first of all, that's kind of messing with my mental health. So I'm not going to do that. But instead, I'm going to go deep by understanding, but I'm going to stay shallow in the sense that I'm not going to overwhelm myself. If I can get
Mhm.
a good working knowledge of X, Y, and Z, then at least that helps me kind of make sense with what's going on a little more. And
Mhm.
then I'm going to dive in to figure out, okay, how do I make sense of it? How do I apply it to my life and all that? And so that little deep, shallow dive methodology, I mean, it really did help me kind of navigate those couple years because I was a person that didn't want to just act like nothing was going on.
Mhm.
And and I think right now, really the good thing is we're 4 years removed from that time.
Till the
And
next one. Till the
well,
next thing, the climate
sure,
change,
a
lockdowns.
absolutely, and we'll see what happens for the next 6 months before the election,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's gonna be normal, and I'll tell you what I think is gonna happen. But what's good right now is people are open to having conversations about this
Mhm.
now. They're open to understanding different perspectives, whereas, we couldn't even have these conversations in 2020,
Mm-mm.
2020, and even
Censored.
part two. Not only censored, but I'm talking about even with our own
Ye
friends,
yeah.
even with our
Same.
own networks. If you
Mhm.
were coming from two sides of, let's say, a mask mandate, or let's say a vaccine mandate, or let's say whatever the discussion was, if you were so on one side, quite frankly, without having done your own deep shallow dive to understand the situation, those conversations you couldn't even have them.
Mhm.
Now think what's nice is because it's 4 years removed and we have hindsight, you know, and we have the luxury of looking at those decisions and being like, "Okay, that doesn't make much sense now." Like, I mean, I love the restaurant analogy. I mean, I remember standing up, putting a mask on, sitting down, taking it off,
No
and it
sense.
was like at the time, I'm like, "This is hilarious." Like, does
Mhm.
COVID not mess with me
Yeah.
when I'm sitting down? That's
Yeah.
the type of stuff that if you're open to, again, just using common
Yeah.
sense
It
and
was.
being rational, let's talk about that
Yeah.
and let's really figure out why that doesn't, you
Right?
know, sense.
And you know what got me through a lot of that were all the memes that came out. They were so awesome. They'd have pictures of some This is okay sitting at a restaurant table, and then this is not okay standing up there. But there were so many amazing memes that got me through so much of the people that didn't really necessarily believe everything the media was throwing at us. I realized the thing that really first I thought it was like, oh, this great slowdown. The earth is cooling off and it's like helping itself. And I always knew with the consciousness of fear, I didn't feed into it, that I wouldn't. My body has this amazing ability to heal. And I listened to thought leaders like Bruce Lipton. There was Greg Braden did a whole amazing episode on what the coronavirus was and how our body was and how we're the natural intelligence, yada, yada. And then I started listening to, I think, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. I think he's gone now. And then it was when they started saying, oh, you have to wear a mask. I'm like, that makes no sense. Oh, you have to wear a mask outside. I'm like, that makes no sense. And like, what the hell is that? And that's when I like, whoop, turned around, like, what? And it kept dragging on. I'm like, I smell a rat in here. Something doesn't smell right. So those kind of things just didn't make any sense. But, we all had our communities and our groups, because if you were outside of what the mainstream narrative was expowing, like, we were just like, I didn't know if people were going to come knocking at my door and yanking me off. like, I'm like, I'm ready.
Totally. But again, I mean, I think the good thing is now, as honestly, I mean, it's pretty crazy, but we're kind of in that same position right now. It's April of 2024. We've got an election in 6 months. And so the question will be, will there be something, who knows what, will there be something that causes disruption in that process? Because again, this is just the facts now. This is the beauty of hindsight. Just the facts. The facts are everything was going the way it was supposed to be going. And then March of 2020, COVID came and it completely changed everything. So that's something now we can all agree on. Whether you agree what it was, what it wasn't, I don't even care. All I want you to agree on is that, okay, things changed. So if things changed starting March of 2020, because of that, I truly think it's continued to change. And so now, over the next 6 months, it'll be interesting to see if there is another disruption that comes into play that, again, causes. And by the way, this is not even controversial. This is more, like I said, rising 30,000 feet and talking common sense. Will there be something that causes somewhat of a disruption in the election? I hope not, but we'll see. We'll see on that. And then at the same time, what I think is the benefit now, and this is what I really kind of what drove me to write the book, is that if you take what's going on in the world and into politics, and you realize that there are forces at play, and those forces are being done by other human beings. And so, nothing is just happening on autopilot. So other people are crafting and taking things in directions that they want it to go. And once you recognize that, it's okay to agree with the direction. Just know there is a direction, and that's kind of what I'm trying to, get across with everything. It's like, hey, do your research, deep dive into something, stay shallow, figure out what that is, and then decide how you feel about that. Like, I think that's the awakening that I had personally, because I may deep shallow dive into something, you may deep shallow dive into the same thing. We may not decide we agree on it. That's amazing. Like, that's super cool, because at the end of that, it's your opinion, your true opinion, and then I've got my true opinion. And if those agree, fantastic. If they disagree, fantastic. And then we can agree to disagree. Like we've lost that ability to have those rational conversations. Yeah, we really have. And it's social media. It's that immediate, visceral reaction that Instagram, Facebook, it's really Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I hate the name X. I think that's dumb. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, now TikTok is in the mix.
Can't do Facebook. I can't. After the last election, I'm like, when did this become Facebook politics? Like, I know most of the people that are friends with me on Facebook. I just can't. I was just seemed so one side. I was like, whoa, I can't. I'm not going through this feed anymore.
Yeah. What I've realized with the different platforms, at least for me, is man, Facebook is really Gen X baby boomers. Like it
Mm-hmm.
really is. It has
Mm-hmm.
really become the platform of 40 plus. And fundamentally, it's somewhere you go to, kind of see someone's birthday, see their kids graduating,
Mm-hmm.
see their, whatever. I mean, some people see their expensive meal that they had, which who cares? But it's not really, there's really not a lot of authenticity on Facebook. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind
Look
of
at
like,
my
it's
life.
all,
It's perfect.
yeah, there is a level of that. But even besides that, it's more just like, hey, here's a life update from me. Here's,
Yeah.
which is cool. I honestly, I
Yeah,
love
for
seeing
sure.
the creativity of that. I think then Instagram has really emerged as a little bit of a combination. I don't think the baby boomer generation are active as much on Instagram. I think Instagram is now Gen X, millennials, and really Gen Y, where it's become a platform of communicating your truth,
Mm-hmm.
allowing your images and your videos to tell the story that you want to be told. And honestly, the same thing with TikTok. I mean, I know TikTok is under a lot of scrutiny right now, and we can definitely talk about that because personally,
Mm-hmm.
I think the scrutiny is completely misguided
Yeah, you're the
because
one that got me to get back on it, actually.
yeah. And I'll tell you what the stuff I see on TikTok, I mean, I've learned so much. And the
Mm-hmm.
crazy part about TikTok is whereas Instagram is really honed in on Gen X, millennials, and really Gen Y, TikTok is all about Gen Y. Like it is all about that youth who's going there to really express their truth. And I will tell you, like, if you spend time on that platform, again, there's a lot of goofy stuff on there, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of well researched
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Like an 18-year-old kid who's sitting in
Mm-hmm.
his bedroom and has, gone back and researched. I mean, I don't want to get too political in this discussion, but gone back and researched, what's going on in, let's say, Israel and Palestine back to like 1917. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
man, like
Mm-hmm.
17 he's doing this. So with TikTok, it's kind of given a voice to that to the youth, really, to that younger generation, because that's really where they're speaking up. And then I see a lot of the clips on TikTok being brought into Instagram. So those two
Mm-hmm.
platforms kind of have emerged as, basically a method for people to really get their news and get their
Mm-hmm.
information, get takes. It's all
Mm-hmm.
about give me a take, give me a take. And so what I think though is missing is a little bit of a, I guess, a methodology along with some almost like some core pillars or core elements that you can then apply to what you're seeing. You know what
The
I mean? Because
DSD, right? The
yeah,
DSD.
and then with that deep shallow dive methodology, I found myself using these four words over and over again. And one day, like literally, I was about 50 pages into writing the book, and I realized, holy mackerel, I'm using these four words so much. Let me maybe there's more meaning to it.
The
And
self-awareness really is that what you're talking the
yeah,
self-aware
yeah,
okay, I'm gonna highlight these.
yeah.
So Ray's gonna dive into the 4 keys or the principles, I don't know what you call them, things that you used for your own diving, deep, shallow dives. It's self-awareness, resilience, authenticity, and empathy. So starting with self-awareness, let's hear your take
Yeah,
on all these.
I love it. This is the meaningful stuff.
Yeah.
And I kind of grouped them under pillars. I was like, okay, these
Mhm.
are the pillars, and
Pillars.
whenever something happens, I'm gonna look at it through these pillars. So self awareness to me, and by the way, these pillars align so well with your podcast because when I
Mhm.
listen to your episodes, honestly, like I get these pillars come through, whether it's from you or your guests. I mean, I've heard the words themselves, especially authenticity. I've heard that word a lot, but like the content of what you talk about, and the concept of having your own personal awakening, I think
Mhm.
align very well with these pillars. So let me
Yes.
kind of let me talk about it a little. Self-awareness to me, this is where it starts. And it's something I try to always, I always want to make sure I'm staying grounded about not only how I'm living, not only how I'm showing the world I'm living, but how I'm thinking about things. And, when it comes to self-awareness, it's really about, not buying into your own hype and your own BS, and just realizing that, like, at the end of the day, we're all the same. We all came from the same, start, and you never want to get too big for your britches. And to me, self-awareness is understanding that, whether you are Elon Musk or whether you are Joe Musk, who is XYZ in Topeka, Kansas, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You have to stay self-aware that fundamentally we're all human beings. And even though some may have more financial success, more whatever success, that's not the barometer of judging each other. So self-awareness is where it all starts, and it's keeping a real, almost keeping yourself grounded. Okay. And then from there, it kind of goes into, when you're grounded, you also start to gain confidence in yourself. And it leads into the next pillar, which is resilience. Gosh, if there's anything hopefully people have grown in over the past 4 years, because it's been a tough 4 years. I mean, it's definitely changed a lot of people. It's changed a lot of mindsets. And so hopefully through that change, and when you can have your self-awareness, you do become more resilient. Like, honestly, I've kind of seen your resilience grow over this course of these years, and really over the course of our friendship. I've seen that resilience, and that resilience is what led you to start a new business, to, even do the podcast that you're doing, and all of that. That's because you're resilient now, and you're like, okay, I get what's going on. I'm aware of myself. And you know what? I'm getting stronger with each of these challenges. That's where I think resilience comes into play. And it's definitely a pillar that really helps you. It's almost like it helps you deal with things, because you're really becoming stronger and you're becoming tougher. So that's the second pillar. You want to go,
Yeah.
let me run.
Well, yeah, the resilience, like your whole shallow, mindful of not overloading. So like you said, self-awareness, the awakening, having resilience, like there's moments where, like, just probably a month ago, I was diving too deep again, and I was being carried away. And there was a Saturday that I woke up and I just wasn't feeling good, because I was just, you do get addicted to scrolling. And we can talk about that too, about how, everyone's addicted to their cell phones. I had to pull back again, and I had to detach, because there is some kind of dopamine hit. I knew I was getting a dopamine hit from all that. So, having that resilience. But then the shallow, like when I read about that, the shallow is mindful of info overload. So that was super important for me as well. So yeah, you can continue.
I think your personality is like, you're like deep dive. And sometimes you really do have to just deep shallow, and you have to, like,
now I can
get
shallow.
get it to where you're not letting yourself, it's really about not letting yourself get overwhelmed by things that are not in your control, or really that you can't affect. And I'll give you two perfect examples. I mean, it's these two situations are so unfortunate, but I like to talk about them because they're real and they're happening. And it's, these two kids over the past, I call them kids, but like over the past, 3 weeks, you've had two people set themselves on fire because of their cause. First you had Aaron Bushnell, and I say his name, just, he deserves to have his name said, but what he did, and that was like deep dive, without any ability to really have perspective on what he's doing.
To pull out to that 30,000 feet.
To pull out to that 30,000 feet thing. And again, the saddest part about it is, we live in a society now where, nobody probably even remembers his name anymore. And his 15 minutes of fame probably lasted, 3 or 4 days, but fundamentally he wasn't able to, I guess, have perspective with himself to realize, okay, I want to stand for something. Totally cool. Stand for it. But what you did was so extreme and unfortunately ineffective because there's no lasting memory to it. So what he would have done was figured out, okay, how can I make a sustainable impact in this? And then the same thing with the guy that set himself on fire last week in front of the Trump case. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
different type of people, but again, fundamentally, they couldn't stay shallow on anything. And so it just caused them to really take something in a direction that it's not even that you can't get it back, because you can't, but they weren't able to be effective with what they were trying to
Mm-hmm.
do because our attention spans are gone
Mm-hmm.
because of phones. I mean, our attention spans now are scrolling. That's our attention span. And so the whole concept of deep shallow dive and then the other two pillars, which I do want to talk about in a second, is to just try and give people a little bit of a foundation to try and analyze what's going on, and not only in politics but in their relationships,
Mm-hmm.
in social issues. I have a chapter dedicated to health and wellness. I have a chapter dedicated to family life. So it's all about trying to implement the DSD methodology. And then the last two pillars, which go with self-awareness and then also go with resilience. The next one's authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's another one that like I really strive on a personal level to just be authentic with people, like don't give people the answer they want to hear. Give them your real answer and just be real with people and just be yourself and be authentic. And that authenticity, honestly, it's funny. I think when you take self-awareness and really make that a part of your mindset, it develops that resilience. It makes you, tougher. It makes you stronger. And then that's when you become more authentic. You really do become more authentic, not only with the world, but with yourself. You absolutely become more authentic with who you are as an individual. And then the fourth pillar, which honestly has probably been the most impactful one for me, is the concept of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always known that word and I've always like heard that word, but I've never really like dived into what that word truly means. And I figured out it's pretty simple. Empathy for me is role reversal, and it's putting myself in the other person's shoes and then analyzing whatever we're talking about through that lens. So if we're having a family discussion or a political discussion or even a health discussion, if we're talking about, hey, should I get on this weight loss drug or should I not get on this weight loss drug? Instead of just having that discussion, when you apply empathy, and let's say the person you're having the discussion with is significantly overweight, when you put yourself in their shoes, you're able to look at things from their perspective and you can be empathetic to what they're going through. And then you can help maybe make a better decision or help them think through, that decision. So those four pillars, self-awareness, resilience, authenticity, and empathy, they're the pillars that really guide the deep shallow dive methodology. So if deep shallow diving is the roof of the building, those four pillars are what's holding the structure up. And it's been pretty crazy. Like I live this mentality now, and it helps me deal with things. It helps me deal with personal relationships. It helps me deal with stuff going on my family side. And then it especially helps me deal with when I see the constant barrage of, news things that are happening. I try to deep shallow dive them,
Mm-hmm.
and then I try to look at it through those pillars. And at the end of all that, I end up with my opinions. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what it's all about,
Mm-hmm.
coming to your own opinions about things.
Yeah, that's so I'm going to use your pillars next time but I've gotten to a place as well where I'm scrolling because I took a detox from social just to get rid of that dopamine hit. It's like a freaking, I'm like, I knew it. I'm like, it's the chemical reaction I'm getting. And I've done like the deep dives, I've done the rabbit hole and I pulled myself out, but I had to, get rid of social for a little bit, the scrolling at least. And where is I going with this? I just like had a brain fart.
You
Um,
know, I'm glad you did that because again, like the reason is that and by the way, there's a lot of positive things about social media. Like I definitely am not on the side of like it should all go away and it's terrible and things like that. Like for
Mm-mm.
example, let's
Thank
talk
God.
Facebook specific. I mean, I love birthdays on Facebook. I always
Mm-hmm.
say like birthdays win on Facebook because it's
Mm-hmm.
like that one time where
Oh, I need
everybody's
to go back.
positive with each
I need to
other
go
and they
back and look at that. My birthdays. I haven't.
Birthdays are fun. Birthdays are
Yeah.
fun on Facebook. Or like, getting a chance to, I mean, it's funny, obviously I still live in California, but I grew up in the Midwest and I grew up in Ohio. So I have a really nice big network of friends and family still in Ohio and Michigan
Mm-hmm.
and all those, Midwest states. And so, yes, obviously I haven't got to physically be with those people, remotely as much as they get to be with each other if they all, let's say, live in Cleveland still. But I've got to see their kids grow up
Mm-hmm.
over Facebook, and that's been amazing. Like
Yeah, it
seriously, it's
is.
been amazing having the ability to see my friends' kids grow up and like, graduate high school, go to college, do X, Y, and Z. That's amazing, and that to me is social media at its finest. And
Yeah,
whether it's
absolutely.
on Instagram or on Facebook or whatever, that's social media at its finest. But the problem becomes it's that visceral reaction
Mm-hmm.
of kind of hate that it allows to happen. And that's probably you probably started getting so angry with seeing things.
Oh
But
my God.
I'm really glad you did that because you
Yeah.
need
Yeah, and then I've been trying to change the algorithms so I don't see as much because I know enough now. I know enough about something that I don't need to like look at every post or listen to. I can just read whatever their headline is. Okay, that's happening. Or I see a certain presidential figure on. I'm like, I'm not listening to you. Like, I can't hear your voice. I just don't listen to it. I know enough to know what they're proposing or what they're talking about to not have to lose myself. I stay shallow. Like you said, I pull 30,000 feet out.
that's good. That's
So
good.
that's what I had to do. Now I'm at that point again where I'm like, I don't even do the whole scrolling thing. I know I was off of it for a little bit. Like I'm trying to feed it with less political stuff, but thank God we do have social for anything political or anything that's going on in the world, or so we'd have to take what the legacy media tells us, which we now know is the mouthpiece, big pharma, big tech, government. We'd have to listen to that. Now we have all these independent journalists. We can see what's actually going on for real. There's also discernment with that as well, because you got to make sure that what they are actually reporting on is actually like real and not, because there's a lot of, what do they call it? Not misinformants, but I don't remember the word for it, where it's not actually like, it's like a false
Like
flag, or it's a
like
false,
there's oh yeah,
yeah,
what are they?
false
Yeah.
actors. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah,
That's
and as far as like staying connected, thank heavens, because like I left an amazing real estate company, PLG Estates, and I get to see them with their families and having kids and their successes. And I get to see everything that you've done. You've had this amazing podcast that I counseled you on the first time that you wanted to start your podcast, and you launched into the stratosphere. How many episodes do you have now?
today was 138.
Holy
So
cow.
38 episodes since roughly September. But yeah, I totally I shouted you out, and I think episode number 3, I was like, hey, got to give props to Nancy Walters. She was my muse, and no, again, you helped me think through getting that off the ground, and and even that, like my podcast is called Deep Shallow Dive, and that's what I do on every episode. I try to deep shallow dive into what's going on. What is going on in the current stuff, and then I also take it back and I figure out things like, okay, what really happened with? I'm just spitballing on these. I'm just using a couple examples. Like, let me look at the JFK assassination. Let me
That was a
look at
great episode. Yeah.
9/11. Let me look at the Sound of Freedom movie that came out, which now you hear nothing about. Let me look at whatever. Let me look at the withdrawal from Afghanistan. But let me look at it through a nonpartisan,
Neutral. Mm-hmm.
neutral
You do.
lens of common sense. And that's all I want to do. I just want to understand what the reality of those situations could have been from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it's not like, it's not like
Change
radical
people's.
or
Mm-hmm.
change people's minds. I just want you to have a
You would.
have a unbiased, deep, shallow dive into X, Y, and Z, and then have you think, it's plausible. That's
Curiosity. You're
yeah, it
helping.
is.
Yeah.
It is. And then the other thing is like, there's a great Steve Jobs quote that he talked about in one of his interviews where he said, once you, and I'm going to paraphrase, he's like, once you realize that everything else in this world, everything that we're using, whether it's this platform to do this podcast, your microphone, my vest, whatever the case may be, our glasses, everything else in the world was made up by human beings who are really no smarter than you. So everything that we're using, wearing, consuming, other human beings made this stuff up. And so I really internalized that to what's going on in the world, because what's going on in the world is being done by other human beings who honestly are no smarter than you and I. They're just in those roles. And when you realize that, what is taking place is not a doctrine that came out of the sky, that's when you're like, okay, hold on a second. Let me analyze what's going on. Let me apply my own common sense to what's going on. And let me decide for myself if I think X, Y, and Z is right, if I think something else is right. And that fundamentally, I feel like, unfortunately, what's caused people to almost stop thinking for themselves to an extent is when you have fear, when you're scared of something in a situation, you're almost like, okay, tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Tell me, tell me what to think. Give me your opinion. And then that's where this social media, when it's this scrolling mentality, you see something for 30 seconds from some random person, and then, you're just believing that. Well, that's just not the way we should be thinking about everything. So really my goal with all of this, whether it's the podcast, the book is really couched under how to have a more authentic relationship with yourself. And so it's literally called Deep Shallow Dive into You. So the book is really about you, about cultivating a more authentic relationship with yourself. And that's kind of been my awakening. That's been my path that I've been on since March of 2020. And again, it's a very positive path. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very awakened path. All it is trying to get almost like get to know myself better, And from that, it's helped me become more self-aware. I really have developed, resilience. I hope people would say this, I've become even more authentic. I've always considered myself a pretty authentic person. But the one thing that it's really developed is this pillar of empathy. Like, I really do look at what's going on in everything through a empathetic lens right now.
What about minor attracted persons?
Minor.
I'm sorry. There's no lens to look at that.
No, there's no empathy for that.
Right. Yeah.
I don't do role reversal and be like, oh, okay, I understand. No, I mean, there's definitely right versus wrong. I'm talking about. I'll give you a very real example. Yeah, that one.
Or men in women's locker rooms.
No, that stuff.
It's like,
I'm actually glad you put me on the spot with that one, because I do want to say, regardless of a deep shallow dive methodology, regardless of these pillars, there's still right versus wrong.
Exactly.
There's still right versus wrong. And so I'm definitely not of a mindset that everything can be justified. Not at all. So, there's definitely right versus wrong. But like right now, for example, I mean, obviously that's a hot topic. The Israel-Palestine stuff is a super hot topic. And when I think about that topic, the empathy that comes through for me is I think about the families of the hostages still. Can you imagine?
No.
If your loved one, your husband, wife, kid was held hostage for going on 6 months now?
And they're like forgotten about.
Yeah, really. It really is. So my empathy starts with putting myself in the shoes of the family of the hostages and thinking, oh my God, I'm out of my mind if my loved one was there. And then on the Palestinian side, I mean, you see it. You see the videos. You see the, what's taking place with the innocent civilian side.
Mm-hmm.
Innocent civilian side. And like, how can you not be empathetic toward, a 6-year-old girl that's standing in a pile of rubble and her
Course.
parents are dead 2 feet away?
Just war is just awful.
Be empathetic about that,
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I feel like we need to get back to just being human beings first.
Mm-hmm.
Strip away religion, strip away
Absolutely.
national culture, race, skin color, whatever. Like, we're all human beings. And so that empathy for me, it really has enabled me to, handle those situations because I put myself in their shoes and I'm able to see both sides. And this is where I really, I'm trying to, get people to, just rise up to 30,000
Mm-hmm.
feet on the issue and try and think about it from both sides. Use these pillars to help your mindset, and then use the methodology to help you really understand it. Because that's the problem. Like, most people are so confused about everything that's going on because there's so much going on
Yeah.
that it just becomes, okay, what did I see on
It's
this
upside
30-second
down
reel?
world.
My opinion. Yeah, it is upside down world.
It's
We are
really like,
definitely,
who would have
it
thought? I'm
is.
so glad we grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, like, are the lives that we had without cell phones, without internet, with, we got to like go out and play. It just the things that are coming at us. I was like, when I first awakened back and saw how when I first started paying attention to politics and stuff, I'm like, was it always like this? Was it always this divisive? Like,
It
I
was.
stopped watching news like years ago, like with the Jesse Jackson and the Al Sharpton, like everything, like it was race baiting. Like, I stopped watching because it was like race, like, but that's on purpose because that's why we need to come together as humanity, like using your pillars and seeing the humanity and empathy, because we're all in this together. We all bleed red. We're all the same underneath skin color, but and we know who they is, they're trying to put us into all these little boxes. So we're so divided from our own divinity, which is ourselves as a humanity, and from working together and coming together. Because if we are all together as one human species, human spirit, we're unstoppable. And the powers that be that are trying to dismantle us and take our freedoms away and all that, they can't win. They can't succeed in what their agenda and their plans are. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I will say,
No.
I do. It's always been there. The
Mm-hmm.
division has
Not
always
the
been there.
intensity, though.
But the intensity's been brought to light because of social media.
Yeah.
Never before have we had immediate access like that to
Mm-hmm.
what's going on,
Yeah.
So if you think about, I mean, honestly, there's a part in the book where I talk about all the events over the past like 3 years. And then I'm like, what would these events been like without social media? I'll give you a perfect example. Like, I think it was last year, the Titan submersible sub that went
Oh,
to,
yeah. Distraction. Shiny object.
totally. But what I'm saying is, imagine that happening without Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, any of that, or
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, right? It would have been maybe a 30-second segment on the 6 o'clock news that if you happen to tune into the 6 o'clock news, you would have heard about it. And the next day, maybe there would have been, a blurb about it in the LA Times or the Plain Dealer or what's the magazine, what's the newspaper, the Detroit Free Press or whatever. And if you didn't read the newspaper, you would have never even heard about that.
Mm-mm.
But instead,
It's immediate.
because of social media, not only is it immediate, but it is just all encompassing and overwhelming and in your face through that entire cycle. And I find these events, they have like a 1 week life cycle on social media, whether it was the Titan submersible, the two gentlemen that set themselves on fire, those didn't even have a week, or like, think about, there's been so many one-off things that if it wasn't for Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, most people wouldn't even have known about those things. And
Mm-hmm.
they would have caused the controversy, and then the division. So that division, that's all been because of social media. And that's the unfortunate side of social media. It's given that immediate platform of, I mean, honestly, to an extent, hate, but at least if you don't want to get that, I guess, hardcore about it, it's given that immediate platform of people getting into arguments without even knowing what they're arguing about,
Keyboard warriors.
Yeah, exactly. So that stuff is definitely a grind. But I will say, I do think that we are I hope most people are in a more awakened state in April 2024 than they were April 2020. And all I ever talk about with my friends is, I'm saying, hey, listen, believe what you want to believe. That's totally cool. I'm just saying, learn from the past. Learn from the past 4 years, and let's at least try and apply some principles, some methodology, whatever you want to call it. Because again, we are right now in a very similar situation as we were in 2020. And so, the proof's going to be in the pudding. Like what the next 6 months until November happens, I think it's going to get wild.
It's going to get wild for sure. And that's why it's so important to have podcasts and voices like your own that really dive into these topics. And you do it from such a neutral perspective. And thank God we have independent media that we can hear about what's going on, because the way, like ABC, NBC, all those, MSNBC, it's one way. It's like one narrative, and the next station will have the same thing. We'd only be hearing that perspective. And if we just listen to that, we're only going to hear that perspective instead of what the majority of America, I think they feel like we did. And they've learned a lot over the last couple of years about what was, told it as the one size fits all. And so you've seen the flip-flopping of the narrative. They've seen that, but we're not seeing that on mainstream media. It's still carrying the same narrative as before. While we might not have the coronavirus, like updates and the deaths ad hoc, like remember, it was like that scrolling thing nonstop, and now it just stopped, and like we're supposed to forget about all of it. So a lot of people have learned from that, but we're not seeing it the way it's purported on the mainstream news. Now I see clips on my independent channels on like Instagram and the people that I follow, and that's how I see clips from mainstream, and it's like, oh my God, like what the hell? So if people only had that to rely on, and I know a lot of people are moving away from that. They're listening to Tucker Carlson, they're listening to people like Megyn Kelly, Joe Rogan, people like yourself, to hear, instead of just hearing like these commentators spewing out the same thing, they're seeking out people like yourself to hear and make their own decisions, therefore.
Oh, and like you, absolutely.
Me, waking heart, to hear me bitching about some of the stuff that's going on.
I just think people need to realize they're smarter than they give themselves credit for. Because the one thing that no one can take away from us is common sense and our gut instinct. You know what I mean? Like our gut instinct is pretty solid if you let it come to the forefront. And so the challenge right now is to get people, instead of, I really do, I call it that scrolling mentality. And this is hilarious. Like one part of the book I talk about, I'm going to admit this. Why do I take my phone into my bathroom with me? I do. And I've stopped doing it because I recognize like this phone has become like an extension of my hand. Like, what is the obsession that I need to take it into the bathroom with me and look at it while I'm going to the bathroom? That's insane. If anybody listening does that.
Yeah. I see it at the gym, in between sets.
Yeah, in between
sets. And when they're out, like I've seen tables of everybody just on their phone, or they pull it out on an uncomfortable situation, or they pull it out as to not interact with other people. Like there's times when I'm just looking around trying to make eye contact so I can have some human interaction. The phone is covering that up. And they're even going out, like instead of meeting women in person, they're on their phone looking, flipping through their Bumble or whatever it is. Like, hi, I'm a real world woman here.
Absolutely. But like, even like, I see people crossing intersections, looking at their phone. I'm like, dude, like there could be a driver looking at
not
their
paying
phone
attention.
going to get barreled into. But these phones, it's really been the phone that I think has
When the
been the
iPhone came.
enabler when iPhone came. And again, here's another topic that, to be fair, you got to look at both sides of it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm
A lot of
so
good with it.
my phone. It's insane what
Mm-hmm.
we all do on our phones. That's amazing. That's incredible. It has not only, facilitated business for me, it's facilitated so much productivity in my life. There's so many amazing things I do on my phone. Love that. Okay. But at the same time, they've become something that unfortunately have changed the social dynamic of interactions.
Mm-hmm.
They've changed the way people really socialize in a lot more in the United States than in Europe. I mean, I think you go to Europe, you go to a restaurant, and you really do still see people enjoying the human camaraderie. Here, you go to a restaurant, and I mean, you're seeing everybody on their phone. And so I talk about that in the book, where it's like, hey, we need to break that cycle. Let's use our phone for all the amazing things that it can do. But at the same time, when you're watching TV at night, you don't need to be on your phone. Put your phone across the room and let it charge, and be in the moment with whatever show you're binging. And by the way, the self-awareness in me when I wrote this thing, it's because I do all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of everything I'm telling you not to do. I'm telling you that because I'm guilty of all of it. Like, I'm self-aware enough to be like, dude, I do all of that. And I'm going to stop doing all of that. And honestly, I really have. I've stopped doing so much of what I call out. And it's amazing. I'm definitely more at peace with myself. I'm happier. I'm actually enjoying the things that, were being tarnished a little bit by my obsession of being on my phone, and I think a lot of people have that. So I talk about that in the book. What else? All right, I'm gonna let you ask some more questions.
Yeah, I put mine on airplane mode at a certain time. Like, I try to step when I was deep diving without being shallow about it. When I had to take a break after, like, I was like going to bed, that's the worst thing you can do is scroll and then go to sleep. And it just really affected me. But yeah, I stop. I don't answer phone at 8 o'clock. And like when I put it on airplane mode at night, and I put it under my my nightstand so the EMFs or whatever don't get me. So I literally shove it underneath. And another thing is not opening it in the morning, going right on social, like having some time to yourself or having your coffee, looking out the window, going for a walk, going to exercise, whatever you need to do. It's an important thing. But I mean, our phones are good. Technology is good. And then when you overuse anything, it just is detrimental.
No, technology is amazing. I mean,
And
it's
AI now,
incredible.
man, it's making things easier in a lot of ways
Yeah.
if it's used
Well,
correctly.
absolutely. And I think where we are right now with AI, that's a great topic to talk about, is, I mean, it's exactly where we were with the birth of the internet and then the birth of mobile. I mean, to me, the first major change in life was really the internet. And that was probably, I mean, as crazy as this is, that's probably like 2005, 2006, 2004. Like, before that, not the internet wasn't the internet, not even of today, but like it wasn't part of our daily routine, right? So the birth of the internet was really, let's say 2004, 2005, in terms of it being something you're absolutely leveraging every day.
Yeah.
And then with social kind of came along with the iPhone. They kind of came together. And that was really 2000, let's say
8, 9.
yeah, 2008's probably kind of like where it really hit its stride, where the iPhone and smartphones in general, along with, the rise of Facebook, the rise of all that stuff. Because again, like MySpace, which was the
Oh, yeah.
predecessor,
Short-lived. We thought Facebook would be short-lived too, but
MySpace is the predecessor to Facebook. MySpace, I
that was
never remember
fun
it on mobile. I remember it on my computer, on the
because we
browser.
didn't really use internet on our phones back then.
Right, that's right. So that second revolution was really 2008, 2009, and it was the adaptation of mobile along with social media. And
Now we're
obviously
AI.
taken on a crazy life. And now we're in the AI cycle. And
It's
so
changing so
it's
fast. Like, it is learning so fast. It's going to simplify a lot of the
it's
work
going
that
to
we do.
simplify a lot of amazing stuff. I know you use it for a variety of things with your
Mhm.
podcast and with your business. I use it a lot. I really
Mhm.
use it a lot, especially for the podcast. It helps me with things, but at the same time, it is now scary,
Yeah.
the deception
In the wrong
that
hands, yeah.
create. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And that's going to happen. I mean,
Mhm.
I think that's part of what's going to get wild over the next
Yeah.
6 months up until the election is you're not really going to know, okay, I just saw a clip from Trump or I just saw a clip from Biden. Yikes. What? I can't believe that person said that. But like, that might not even be real. And
Mhm.
they've got it dialed in to
Mhm.
where whether it's cloning of the voice or whether it's cloning of the actual, person, like they have that stuff dialed into where sometimes it is really hard to tell the difference. And again, when you're scrolling and you're not really focused, but you kind of are, and you see something that was AI generated, you're not going to understand that, hey, that was fake. That wasn't
Mhm.
really Trump who said that, or that wasn't really Biden who said that. So, like,
Mhm.
this is going to cause havoc. It's
Oh,
going
yeah.
to absolutely cause havoc.
Yeah, we've already seen the what are they called? The actors, crisis actors. I've
Crisis
seen them
actors.
in so many different shot like, here she is here, and here she is
Yeah,
here, and
yeah,
then I've even seen one where somebody it was just a normal street, and then they put, like, bombed buildings behind them and the fire and stuff, so it looked like
yeah,
there was
yeah.
a war and there was nothing happening, or,
It's
like,
not.
overcrowded hospitals, and that wasn't happening, they're empty. Like, we had reporters going in and showing they're not overwhelmed here. Like, that wasn't AI, but just like, well, they were AIing that they were overwhelmed and like people falling in the streets, and it was like empty in the hospital. So we're going to see a lot of it play out. So that's where having the shallow dive and then find out in your information and then use all these pillars. That'll help you get through it. There's one more thing before we go, one or two more questions. I was listening to a podcast, I forgot who, because that was helping me because I had gotten into a state of where I told my friend, because she does intuitively counseling all the time. She helps me out all the time, but how I was just getting so dragged down because of everything that was going on in the world. She's like, "Oh my gosh, Nancy." She's like, I have like I'll go out with a guy and they run away from me because somehow this stuff comes up and I get so mad about it. And I was listening to this because she's saying, well, if you're trying to control all things, it's because you have fear over these things. I'm angry about all this. It's trying to control it and there's fear in it. And I was listening to this podcast where she was talking about, okay, so you don't have control about all these things that happen in the world, like what's going on in Palestine. Like that is not our reality, and how like on a deeper level we're all projecting our own, everything's like an illusion. This is way out, out there, illusion. We're projecting our own reality, where the people in Palestine that it's happening to, that's their own reality. They're right there. That's first person. Here, it's a second person. Like we're hearing from them. We can empathize with them. That's where empathy comes out, but it's not in our world right now. The only thing we have control about, even though we don't have control over everything kind of unfolds a lot, but is what's in our world right now. Like, here's this microphone, like you're in front of me, like to just that was a way that helped me not get so drawn away, like what's happening at the border and what's happening with women's in women's spaces and stuff. It's not happening in my own individual world right now. There's things we can do to help create change, like put a post about it, or maybe donate to our local like women's shelter or something like that. Be aware of it, but be of the world but not be in the world but not of the world. Which one is that? Is it the Jesus be of the world but not in the world? Be in the
Oh,
world but
no,
not of the world. It's one of
I
those.
totally understand what you're saying.
Right.
And I mean, I think that something to help people deal with all that, because it's a lot. It's a
Mhm.
lot, is having a core basis to analyze things,
Mhm.
like so when XYZ happens, you can really rely on some way of, breaking that down. And that
Mhm.
really does start with deep shallow diving it, like I joke around and I call it DSD. I'm like, oh, let me DSD that and I'll get back to you. But it
Mm-hmm.
really is about trying to really understand what is it going on. And then again, when you look at things through these lenses of, self-awareness, authenticity, resilience, empathy, you just can understand it better, like the women's rights issues, or the women's reproductive rights issues. But like one issue that I think is like blows me away is, the women's sports issues, like having transgenders. And
Mm-hmm.
again, if you want to be transgender, everyone has one life.
No
Live it.
problem.
Do you, do
Yeah.
you,
Have your
do
own
you.
sports.
Exactly. But uh when I think about like my friend's daughter, whom I've seen from the age of 6 dedicate herself to like being the best women's swimmer she can possibly be. And I'm making this up. And she gets to a point where she's a collegiate swimmer, and she's doing it. She's living her life. And then she loses to, someone like Leah Thomas, who decides to be transgender 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's not
No,
fair.
it's not.
Fair. You can't, that's not fair. And that's
Mm-mm.
where, like, you have to call a spade a spade. That's
Mm-hmm.
another catchphrase I've adopted,
Mm-hmm.
and honestly, it's
Tell
not
us where
mine.
that came from. I was interested that from the 16th century, just
Yeah, I mean, that
how
thing
people have
like
been
was
using it for a long time.
rooted in the 16th century, and then like in England, it started to kind of the cheeky Brits started to use it in a way to kind of call each other out on their BS. And that's what I love about it. And like, from really March of 2020, I really embraced it. I was like, dude, let's call a spade on this. And I started saying it so much that it's really resonated with me. And again, it goes into that self-awareness. It goes into, especially the authenticity. I think it kind of comes hand in hand with authenticity, because again, if you call a spade on everything with each other, even if it hurts your feelings, it's hurting your feelings probably because it's true. You know what I mean? And the truth hurts. And so that phrase has definitely kind of, become part of like the podcast for sure. I end every episode with call a spade a spade. And it's true. Just do
Mm-hmm.
that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because that's how we all should be. We should all be truthful about what is really taking place and how we really feel.
And I love this. I love this conversation. I love your pillars that we all should be DSDing. And two more questions before we go. So I liked your dedication. I want to hear. You have a dedication to your dad, and one of the last things he said was, "I am always with you." So he's had a huge influence in your life, and he probably
Yeah.
still does today. I mean, I lost my dad last January, and I'm back in Michigan to be closer to my mom. You just saw I had her 88th birthday celebration, and
I was
how
there.
important our family is, how important someone like your father is to yourself. So, and you said you strive to embody the values. So you had like an amazing upbringing with your
I did.
with your
I
dad.
had an amazing dad. I really had an
Mm-hmm.
amazing dad. And, it's funny as the years go on of not having him physically here, it's like you realize all the things that were amazing about him. And
Mm-hmm.
my dad in particular, my dad was the original critical thinker. He
Mm-hmm.
really was. Like, he was such a critical thinker, but he was fair. I wish my dad passed away in 2015. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I didn't start really being this version of myself until 2020. But man, I wish I was this version of myself when
Mm-hmm.
he was alive, because I would have absorbed so much more of what
Mm-hmm.
he was saying. But the beauty is, even though he's passed, he absolutely has been integral in every aspect of, my reinvention almost. And so for me, he really is my guiding light and my North Star. And it's funny, people are like, oh, do you believe in God? And I'm a spiritual person. I can't say I have an affiliation to a specific religion. And I say, yeah, I believe in God. And to me, God right now is this entity, and it's my dad. I mean, those are the
Mm-hmm.
those are the two things that help guide me. So yeah, my book and everything, the podcast, and it is all kind of in his honor. And then the second part of my dedication, I've had three friends over my lifetime just pass away far too young. And, one of them was when I was in high school. And, he's been with me. His name's Kevin Kelly. He's been with me ever since high school for sure. And then, my other two friends, it's more recent. One was 2022 and one was 2020. And, just far, far too young. And
Mm-hmm.
those are three people that also, when I do things, they're kind of front and center with me. And so, I did want to kind of call out part of the dedication to them, because as I was
Mm-hmm.
writing this book, I really did think about those guys. I thought
Mm-hmm.
about my dad the entire time. But, my three friends, whether it was Kevin, Dave Hebenstraight, or Jackson Rahm, those guys they were top of mind with me as I was writing, especially about the authenticity stuff and, the family relationship, the family dynamic, and all that. So anyway, I'm
Mm.
glad you liked that
Yeah,
dedication.
I
That was
did.
my
Yeah, I
favorite
feel the
page of.
same way about my dad as well. And like, gosh, why didn't I talk to him more about his stories? Like he was a professor. He at Wayne State University created a whole like life college of lifelong learning. And I mean, he has 5,000 books in his library, and just talking about his time in the war. And like he was invited to like Area 51. I think, he was. I didn't even know he had a part in making the hydrogen bomb, or they wanted him for that. And then he's like, well, how am I supposed to raise a family if I can't talk about anything? How am I supposed to have a family? So he got out of that, went into teaching. So there's so many things I wish I had, sat down and talked to him about. And then my best friend, Kim, she lost her battle with cancer like 2 months ago. And she's the first one of our closest girls that left. And I was just out there with the celebration of life for her. And we got to like really feel the feels out there. But they have a huge, huge influence in our life. And just because they're gone, the physical body's gone, but it's just another transition. It's the energy transitions. We just can't feel it anymore. So they're still around as your dad's around you, your friends are around you. And that's why you got, you felt your dad the whole time you were writing your book and doing your podcast. And then they came clearly into view that,
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
you felt you needed to dedicate to them. So beautiful. Well, I've loved this conversation. I would love for people to know where to find your book and to
Yeah.
find your podcast or anything else that's lighting you up right now.
Yeah, as far as a podcast, it's just search Deep Shallow Dive on all the platforms that this wonderful podcast is on as well. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I think those are the two big ones for most people. But
Mm-hmm.
iHeart, Pandora, Audible, Amazon Music, anywhere. Just look Deep Shallow Dive. There'll be a picture of me with an orange background. And then the book right now is in a 90-day exclusive launch on Amazon. So that's kind of cool. You can get it in a paperback, a hardcover, and then also on Kindle. And so if anybody is like a Kindle Unlimited person that pays for, I think it's $9.99 for Kindle Unlimited, you can actually get the book for free because it's
Mm-hmm.
part of the Kindle Unlimited plan. But yeah, that also, just look up Deep Shallow Dive or Deep Shallow Dive Into You, which is actually the title of the book. But they can find that on Amazon. And yeah, this has been awesome. And I
Yeah.
will say one last thing on the
Mm-hmm.
parents, because your dad, similar to my dad, was the OGs of original thinking. And we are both blessed to still have our moms. And I know you
Oh,
take
yeah.
wonderful care of your mom, and I try to do the same with my mom. I want people to remember one thing, and that is, before they were our mom and dad, they were just some dude and some chick.
Mm-hmm.
Like, really, if you realize your parents were actually humans before they became your parents, and they were just a guy and a girl, it really does change the mindset a
Mm-hmm.
little, and it flicks a switch, and you start looking at your parents, our moms now, since we both don't have our dads, as kind of like your friends. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, I always tell my friends, I'm like, dude, treat your mom the way you treat my mom. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're so nice to my mom. And then you tell me all these like craziness you have with your own mom. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I want to leave with encouraging people, especially in our age group, to try to put whatever happened in the past aside with your
Mm-hmm.
parents. I'm telling you, poof, one day,
Yeah.
gone. They're
Yeah.
gone. And it's always good to go out with no regrets when it comes to,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
parents.
And start doing that now because my mom, she has Alzheimer's and she's just a ball of fire. She is so funny and just like I didn't realize she had this much personality because she's mom before. And I didn't really sit down and talk with her about so many different things. We talk about service things or like, we talk about things, but not really diving more into her life. And we still have some conversations that I get out of her. But she's like, it's fun now with my mom because it's like, what would make a little kid happy? Like, we bought her all
What's
kinds
her,
of like art supplies and what's that?
what's her first name? What's her first name?
Marie.
Okay. So your mom was Marie before she was your mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once that switch flicks, you kind of look at them differently. And I love it. I
Yeah.
love seeing all the things you do with your mom, and I loved seeing her birthday and all that. And
Yeah.
wish her a birthday on my behalf.
I will. So one more thing I want to ask you before we go. This is something I ask all my guests. If you've listened to my podcast, you know what I'm about to ask. And it's the name of my podcast. And I want to know what it means to you to live with an awakened heart.
Honestly, what's great about it is to live with an awakened heart aligns so perfectly with everything about Deep Shallow Dive because the two of them kind of do go together. And even the pillars are about living with an awakened heart. I actually think the pillars resonate particularly, and you're welcome to use them as your own. But if you really think about it, living with an awakened heart to me is all about being true to yourself. And more importantly, man, this book could almost be yours. It's about having that authentic relationship with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That fundamentally, which is literally the subtitle of my book, that to me is what an awakened heart is. An awakened heart is an authentic relationship with yourself to where you're truly like you're good with yourself and you know who you are and who you aren't. So anyway, I love it. I really do think, and my wish for people is to have an awakened heart and to have an authentic relationship with themselves. And that's it. Like the
Mm-hmm.
rest is noise. The rest is noise.
Mm-hmm. Authenticity. Yep.
Yeah, it
I
really
love it.
is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ray. This was so fun to have you on the
Oh,
podcast. And I'm going to put all your information in the show notes. And I encourage everyone to seek out his book. I got to read the first chapter and I was drawn in right away. I saw a lot of similarities within myself. And then, of course, go check out Ray's podcast, Deep Shallow Dive. And I'm sure you will be inspired. And yeah. And that's it for today.
all right. Thanks,
All
everybody. I
right.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nancy.
All right. Bye, Ray. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Awaken Heart podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, share it with a friend. And if you haven't already, head on over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, you can reach me at theawakenheartpodcast.com.